I have a question for Aphrodite.
Yeah.
So I think my question is around the protocol. So in a protocol of a Cochrane review, how do you kind of include those methods? Do you kind of say that you'll use a certain model when it's not rare events, and then if you find there's rare events in a meta-analysis, do you then talk about a different model that you might use? And then how do you define what is rare events? So yeah, a little bit of advice
Yeah,
on that would be great.
yeah. There is no definition. So usually when we see events, 0, 1, 2 per arm, then we conclude that we have a rare outcome. This is a good way of finding out whether we have a rare outcome is by calculating the outcome risk. So if the outcome risk is below 1%, then we might consider we have a rare outcome. So your question is, how do we know in the protocol stage if we have rare events in our analysis?
Yeah, just kind of what would you expect to see in a protocol around the like planning to do an analysis of rare events? Would you kind of have a primary analysis and then you would then talk about if we found rare events in our analysis, we would then explore that through a different analysis?
Yeah, it is usually expected to have some rare events, usually in safety outcomes, secondary and safety outcomes. We won't expect many events in these outcomes. So I would suggest to be very clear that if we have rare events, then we will apply our first model. And in this case, we will also do some sensitivity analysis in order to check the robustness of our results. But
Perfect.
it is quite common for safety outcomes to be very rare. So I think it's something that authors might expect.
Perfect. Thank you. That was really helpful. We've got a question in the chat. This is a really interesting question. So would it be possible to swap it around? And so instead, the outcome is analysed as number of people without the rare event instead of the number of people with the rare event?
Well, that depends on the research question of that authors need to answer. Um, so it clearly needs it clearly needs to be defined at the protocol stage, because if authors are interested in investigating the number of people who had the event, then this is the analysis that they need to have. So usually there's a clinical aspect there that we need to take into account. So we have the same problem if we reverse this. So if our outcome is the number of people who did not have the event, then we will not have events in the non-events. I don't know if this is clear enough. That we will have the same issue again. So I think it doesn't matter how we will choose to define a question. If we don't have enough events, then the problem is there. So usually you define your research question and then you're trying to analyze data. And in either way, you will have problem with rare events. So I don't think there's any way of dealing with this.
Thanks, Aphrodite. Hopefully that answered the question. So Martin's got a question. I did not quite understand the reason why we should not use meta-analysis with risk difference as an output. If I understood this correctly, can you once again explain why?
Risk differences have the advantage that they include all studies. So when we used odds ratios, we had only 10 studies. And when we used risk differences, we had 27 studies. That is because of the formulas. But risk differences from simulation studies have been shown to have very poor statistical properties. If you remember the confidence intervals in the table, they were very wide. So we have too much uncertainty in our results. And usually analysis using risk differences have low power. So in case we have rare events, low power is a huge problem. So if we use risk differences, we might make things even worse. So we wouldn't recommend to use risk differences for these reasons. I hope this answer your question.
Thanks, Aphrodite, for clarifying. So another question from Louise. You mentioned that Pito and MH fixed effect without continuity correction seems to work okay in some circumstances. Can I just confirm that in RevMan, fixed effect doesn't do continuity correction then? So can it be used, or is it just MH random effect that does the continuing correction? So does that make sense?
The continuity correction is being done to include studies with at least one arm with 0 events. So when we do the analysis in RevMan, we see that RevMan uses all these 10 studies regardless of the method that we're using. So these 10 studies were included in all of these 5 statistical models. So I think it does a continuity correction in both cases. I might need to check that, but it does a continuity correction. Other way, I think the formulas cannot be calculated if we have 0 events in one arm.
Thank you, Aphrodite. We've got another question from Ram. How does overall sample size per arm influence the definition of rare events?
Well, usually the larger the sample size, the better things might be. So if we have a large sample size, that means that we might have more events. But this is not a prerequisite. I mean, if you have a large sample size, you will have maybe rare events. So it doesn't quite influence the definition of rare events. It just gives us, maybe we can be, I don't know, maybe we have some confidence that in a large sample size we might observe more events, but this is not, we are not totally sure about this. So it doesn't influence exactly the definition of rare events.
Thank you. Another question from Reef. I have a similar question. In a review with small studies, would you consider 0 to 2 events to be rare? I'm wondering whether we should meta-analyze such results at all.
Well, that's a huge question. Yeah, that's a huge question. If studies are similar enough, well, in a typical meta-analysis, you would check whether studies are similar enough for synthesizing. But in a rare events meta-analysis, you would do the same. You would check whether studies were similar enough to synthesize the results. But if you want to answer a research question and you need to do a rare events meta-analysis, then meta-analysis might be the only way to answer this research question, because individual studies are underpowered. So this is a powerful tool for you to maybe, provide some evidence for the research questions. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion of whether you need to do the synthesis or not, but maybe there's no other way of dealing with this. So maybe we need to synthesize all these underpowered individual studies in order to conclude for our research hypothesis.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I've kind of thought about that as well. I think quite a lot you see kind of reviews just narratively describe studies that have rare events, especially adverse events. Like if there's just 1 or 2 in a couple of studies, it's probably not appropriate to meta-analyze because you've just got a couple of studies, and it probably just makes more sense.
if authors do not feel confident enough with using alternative statistical models, or they don't feel confident with the results, then I think it would be better to find other ways of presenting those results. But they have to keep in mind that studies with rare events are very underpowered, so we cannot have a clear conclusion using just these studies alone. So maybe meta-analysis can give us a hint of what is going on. But if authors do not feel confident with using these alternative meta-analytical models, then okay, this is an option of not doing any analysis.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We've got another question from Louise. The Cochrane handbook suggests using PITO when events are less than 3% per arm. Do you agree with this?
Well, yeah, these thresholds exist. PITO has some specific hypotheses in order to provide valid results. If these hypotheses do not hold, then PITO as well can give some biased estimates. So yeah, I would agree to follow what the Cochrane handbook says. Yeah, PITO method is not a remedy. It doesn't mean that in every rare events meta-analysis we use the PITO method and we have an unbiased estimate. It needs some of the assumptions need to be verified in order to use this method.
Thanks, Aphrodite. There's no more questions in the chat. I just have one question. Yeah. Are these methods available in RevMan Web? And is there plans to include any other methods in RevMan Web in the future that you know of?
No, none of the alternative meta-analytical models, and some of the continuity corrections cannot be done in RevMan. So yeah, we do not have many options. So authors need to maybe use other statistical softwares to analyze the data if they wish to use alternative meta-analytical models. And there have been no discussions whether we can incorporate these models in RevMan, but this is something I would really like to do in the future.
Great, thank you. We've got another couple of questions. Irene has said, can we have a list of the references of the methods you mentioned today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can. I'm not sure how I can show this to you, but I can give you the references for the included models for the alternative meta-analytical models. So I don't know how we can do this. Maybe via email. I'm not sure.
So I can just say that the recording will be available soon, and we'll add the PDF of the slides, so people will be able to look at the final slide and where you listed okay. Your references.
Okay.
Thank you. We got another question. So Maurice has said, could you please clarify again under which circumstances the PITO method is not recommended? I think there was one specific slide on that.
Yeah, PITO method requires that we do not have substantial balance between intervention and control group sizes. That means that if we have the treatment arm with 0 events and then the control arm with much more events than 0, then we might have a substantial imbalance between intervention and control group sizes. And we also need treatment effects to not be exceptionally large. So if these two assumptions hold, then we can use PITO and we can trust PITO's result. Some simulation studies have shown that if these two assumptions do not hold, if we have imbalance between intervention and control group sizes and treatment effects are very large, then PITO method will give biased results. as well. So an alternative there might be the fixed effect Madden-Hensel method.
Great, thank you. Oh, one more question. Another one from Mariz. One follow-up question on Peto. Was zero events in both arms an issue here as well?
Well, yeah. It excludes. Redman excludes generally when, regardless of the method you will choose to follow, it excludes double zero studies. So generally, yes, there are problems there.